So when we say this country's in the shit, we mean it in the most literal sense possible. We really are in the shit. According to latest figures, water companies in England have been discharging more than 3.6 million worth of raw sewage into rivers and seas, an increase of 105% on the previous 12 months. The country just sinking in shit, swimming in shit. Well, I think I've taken that as far as we can, but I'm really delighted to be joined by the brilliant Kat Hobbs from We Own It, Directive We Own It, which is a brilliant, very crucial campaign group arguing for very common sense solutions of public ownership, given the calamitous failures of privatisation. And my word, this really is a striking example of that. And we're just going to talk what the hell is happening, why, and what we can do about it. So firstly, hello, how are you?
Hi, Owen. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
What the hell's going on here then?
I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. You would have thought, after all the attention we've had over the past few years on the sewage that our privatised water companies in England are pouring into our rivers and seas, you would have thought that they might be wanting to clean up their act and show willing and show that actually regulation can work and privatisation can work. And that privatisation can work. But no, in fact, the volume of sewage has more than doubled in the past year. And so these figures out today shows that this is how they're making their money, by ripping you off. They want to put up bills in order to invest in infrastructure. They're leaking away around a quarter of all the water. And they're allowing raw sewage to pour into our rivers and seas, and so much more raw sewage. And the excuse is there's been heavy rain, to which obviously they're supposed to be able to deal with weather. We have rain in England, and water companies can surely predict that. So
it's a bit like when rail companies explain the collapse of the rail system with leaves on the track.
Exactly. These are normal operating conditions. And actually, there's absolutely no excuse. And when you think about the impact of this on our quality of life, on all of the people who use our rivers and our seas, who want to swim in the summer, who want to surf, who want to fish, and the impact on nature, it's absolutely catastrophic. And the fact that it's got so much worse, I think, is a truly appalling indicator. And we have to say, when is enough? Actually, now is the time. We have to say these water companies do not belong in private hands. They should be back in public ownership, and they should be in democratically accountable public ownership, where we can look at what they're doing, how they're monitoring, how they're investing, how they're spending their money, what their plans are, so that we can actually hold them accountable for cleaning up this mess. And the only way forward is to have them in public ownership, so that they can effectively be regulated by the public, and so that the profits, instead of flowing out to investors around the world, can be reinvested back into improving the infrastructure to clean up sewage and clean up leaks.
So what's going on with Thames Water, for example?
Well, Thames Water is in an absolute state of collapse. So they've built up a debt mountain of £18 billion. They're now in a situation where it's not clear how they're going to get the money in to cover that debt. And by the way, all of us pay for all water companies. 20p in every pound is going to pay for their debt. So it's not just Thames Water, but Thames Water is the worst. And so what Thames Water is now saying is, it's saying to Ofwat, well, please can we increase bills by 40%? Please can we not be penalised when we release sewage? And please can we get away with giving out dividends to shareholders, because effectively that's how they get the shareholders on board. Of course, the shareholders want dividends, but those are the conditions that Thames Water is putting to Ofwat and to the government. And of course, those conditions highlight the exact problem that we have here, which is that water is a natural monopoly. There is no market. We don't get to choose. If you're one of Thames Water's 15 million customers, you don't get a choice about it. and they have us over a barrel. And so they've been ripping us off since 1989, and they continue to do that. And the only way that they can actually extract themselves from this situation is by ripping us off even more. And so how long are we going to allow this to go on for? Because actually what we need to be doing is looking at the next 30 years, thinking about climate change, thinking about the state of our environment, and the kind of quality of life we want to have in this country. And if we keep allowing these privatised water companies to leech off us, then we can't solve the problem of sewage in our rivers and seas, because the dividends will keep flowing out, the debt will keep mounting. It's been 72 billion in dividends that's gone out since privatisation, 60 billion debt mountain.
Because they promised investment with privatisation, didn't they?
Exactly. They promised investment. They promised a better service. What's actually happened is that investment has gone down 15% since privatisation. Every single decade, investment has gone down. And it's really important to also make the comparison with what's happened with Scottish Water, which is publicly owned. So over the same time period, they've been investing 35% more, which is £72 more per household per year. So if England had been investing at that rate, that would have been an extra 28 billion into the infrastructure to stop problems like these sewage storm overflows.
Because we're looking, for example, at like a fifth of pipes leaking. You look at this, you just kind of think this is supposed to be a rich country. It's just generally falling apart.
Exactly. And this is a solvable problem, so lots of cities in France, for example, are bringing water into public ownership because they've seen that it doesn't work to contract it out. Obviously, the system here is a little bit different because we decided to sell off our assets wholesale. But in France, they're bringing lots of cities are bringing water into public ownership. For example, Paris, and they've got people round the table in Paris who are representing different interest groups. So they've got households, they've got workers, they've got water scientists, they've got experts. They're cleaning up the River Seine. They're reducing bills. They've got still and sparkling water fountains. They've got all of that because they're actually coming to it with solutions. What we're doing in England is just allowing these privatised water companies to use their customers, the public, as a cash machine, and to use our rivers as a toilet. And there's no end in sight with this government. And actually, there's no mainstream political party making the clear case for public ownership. Although the Liberal Democrats are saying, Sarah Olney has been saying in Parliament, making the case, actually, we need to move to a public benefit company for Thames Water, take it into special administration, turn it into a public benefit company, which, that's an important step in the right direction that she's saying that. But, why are we allowing this to happen? When is enough enough? And if, given that the government has special administration powers that it can use for all water companies, not just Thames Water, on the basis of performance, in what world are they not? In what world do they think that they are performing?
So just on that, I mean, by the way, I love the sparkling water point about Paris, because I remember a few years ago, people raised the prospect in Britain, we could bring our water into public ownership and have sparkling water taps, and it was ridiculed by various media outlets. Look at our lunatics. It's just in Paris, they brought their water companies into public ownership and introduce sparkling water taps. We could have good things. We can have nice things.
Right, exactly. We can have nice things. And actually, what have we got in this country where we haven't invested in our public services and we haven't run public services in the interest of the people who use them? The country's an absolute meltdown right now.
It's a good comparison. Paris just drinking from sparkling water taps, us wading through shit. Just finally then, the point about public ownership, because a lot of people listen to that and go, do you know what, I'm sold. And actually, to be honest, the polling shows most people do want water back under public ownership. And that includes millions of Tory voters. I say millions of Tory voters, but I was going on when the Tories were higher in the polls, and Tory polling is so low now. I don't know how many that means in practice. But anyway, millions of people who don't see themselves as left wing, is the point I was making, support public ownership of water. But they might go, well, how do we afford that then? because and everyone, especially because you've got Labour politicians saying we have no money left, which isn't true. So let's not go down that rabbit hole. That's a lie. But how do we bring water into public ownership? Because people just go, it costs too much.
Yeah, so I think the first thing the government should actually do is ban UK pensions from investing in key public infrastructure like water companies. Now, it's a very small amount because most of our water companies are owned by investors around the world. So they're owned by, sovereign wealth funds, investment management companies in Australia, investors all around the world are profiting from the water service here in England. But there are a handful of pension funds, and actually it doesn't make any sense to put those at risk. So a responsible government and responsible pension managers would be extracting themselves from this situation, especially when you've got a company like Thames Water on the brink. So I would do that first of all. But actually there's lots of different ways that we can get our water back. I think the most straightforward way is, as I say, for the government to use the legal powers that it has, special administration powers, on the basis of performance, to say, we are withdrawing your license to operate now because you've not met a very basic level of performance. And that's something that the government should be doing because these companies aren't performing. But, there are other ways as well. So obviously Thames Water is collapsing. If water companies are collapsing, the government should not be poised to pick up the pieces and then return the company to the private sector, which is what's happening right now. They've actually passed some legislation that makes it easier for them to, instead of transferring Thames Water into public ownership, to essentially enable it to carry on as a going concern, and then back into the private sector, which is what they did with energy retail company Bulb when it collapsed. And that cost us, the taxpayers, 6.5 billion for the government to pick up the pieces there. So we shouldn't be, if these water companies have mismanaged their affairs to such a degree that they're collapsing, the government should be letting them collapse and then using special administration powers to transfer them to public ownership, refinancing the debt. So, honour the debt, but actually the shareholders have messed up at this point. And why should we, the British public, be paying the price for that? There is another suggestion that we've made as well, which is, when you look at the fines that we've been giving to these water companies, they just treat them like, it's like pocket change to them. It doesn't affect them. They factor it into the cost of doing business. Oh, okay, we'll release raw sewage. We'll kill, hundreds of thousands of fish. We'll make the rivers unswimmable for people. And it doesn't matter because, we know we've put aside a bit of money to pay the fine that we know will be on its way from, Ofwat and the underfunded Environment Agency. That's not an acceptable situation. And so, instead of saying we're going to fine them, why not say we're going to take shares in the company? Never mind about fines. We will take a proportionate amount of shares and we will gradually bring you into public ownership over time, because when you've messed up, we get to do that. And what you'd have in the background of that is you'd have water authorities set up in key regions with key interest groups involved, representing households, consumers, representing workers, representing communities, environmental groups, local councillors, water experts. You would have those bodies set up ready to take on that bit of the company. And over time, you'd bring them into public ownership, because we cannot pretend at this point that just carrying on with regulation and fines the way we've been doing since 1989 is working, when the data that's been revealed today so clearly shows that it's not.
Amen. And so much more important for us to loudly say this, given unfortunately both the Conservatives and the Labour Party are not making the case for public ownership. Quite the opposite. And, it was often said, New Labour often said, it's about what works, which wasn't true. But what we're talking about here, if you were actually going to put dogma to one side, then what you would do is support public ownership.
Yeah, exactly. And 7 out of 10 people want public ownership. As you mentioned earlier, Conservative voters want public ownership, a majority of them. And we have an environment minister that is very closely connected to water companies. And we have a Labour Party that is talking about banning bosses' bonuses. That's very much tinkering around the edges. It's the kind of policy that sounds,
we're doing something.
We're doing something. It's not sufficient, because the whole structure of this is a monumental ripoff. The whole structure of this is absolutely rotten. It doesn't work. The incentives are so far from aligned that it makes absolutely no sense. The mountain of debt, the volume of dividends, the leaks, the increasing bills, and then all of this sewage. It's a huge mess in every sense of the term. And tinkering with bosses' bonuses is not a policy that's going to solve that.
Amen. Thank you, Kat, for navigating us through this shitstorm, obviously. But I think, again, it speaks for itself. I think the case very beautifully put by Kat. And I think, well, there's not really a rebuttal to it, because we can see what privatisation has done. It failed on every single measure, as privatisation did with rail and energy and all the rest. And we either deal with it, or we will continue to suffer these horrendous consequences. So do share this video. Let's get the word out. Go and take on public ownership, so we're not just mouthing off like frontline politicians going about how sad it is without doing anything. Let's argue for the case. Do press like, subscribe. Do follow We Own It on Twitter, which is we_own_it on Twitter, and do share their stuff. But yeah, thank you so much to Kat.
Thanks so much, Evan.